Do you wake up every day fired up to make a difference? Are you committed to taking your nonprofit to the next level and beyond? I have news for you. Success isn't about hard work or passion. It's about having a smart, scalable strategy in place. Hi, I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. You may know me as the CEO of Charity Auction Day and Donor Books or the author of The $1 Million Nonprofit. What I help nonprofits achieve that give them a significant edge and a clear path to substantial growth is the ability to strategically fundraise and effectively engage their community. And that's what I'm going to share with you right here on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. In each episode, I'm going to take you behind the scenes to reveal the strategies, techniques, and tactics of successful nonprofits so that you can put these into practice immediately to grow your organization. No matter if we are talking about common pitfalls nonprofits make and how to avoid them, exploring how to accelerate your next fundraising campaign, looking at how to attract ideal donors, or everything in between, this conversation is designed to drive your nonprofit forward. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Kelly. Today, we are honored to have Cheryl Mason as our guest. Cheryl is the CEO and Chief Catalyst of Catalyst Leadership Management and a renowned expert in authentic leadership and strategic innovation. She brings a unique perspective from her tenure as the first woman and military spouse to lead the Board of Veterans Appeals, where she successfully managed a sustainable budget and led transformative initiatives. In this episode, Cheryl will share her insights on leveraging technology, building trust, and driving organizational success. Her experience and advice are sure to inspire and equip nonprofit leaders. Cheryl, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast.
Tom, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, hey, let's dive right in. Cheryl, can you tell us about your journey and what inspired you to focus on authentic leadership and strategic innovation?
Life, Tom. So I know it sounds passé, but that's what happened. As an attorney and then a leader in the federal government space, what I found and what I experienced was that sometimes, more often than not, unfortunately, leaders come in and they see employees as just pieces of the process and not the individual people that they are. And so I decided that I was going to lead differently. And part of that goes back to my youth. As a child, I lost my father to suicide when I was very young. And then growing up in Southern Ohio in the foothills of Appalachia, people treated people differently when they were a little nervous and didn't understand things about them. And mental health and suicide was one of those things people didn't understand. But there were a few people around who did support and encourage me and my family. And then fast forward, I became a military spouse when I married my Air Force husband. And again, I experienced kind of an invisibility piece where people wanted me to fade in the background. And I didn't accept it. And I, again, found people who supported and encouraged me. And what I came to realize is that people are extremely important, but they are important through their impact and your relationships with them. And so that drove me to lead differently. And as I was leading these wonderful, amazing people, I found out that they have lots of ideas, and some of them are about innovation and technology and strategy. So I started listening to them, and I'm like, these are great ideas. We need to implement them. So here we are.
And how do you define authentic leadership, and why do you believe it is crucial for nonprofit success?
So I define authentic relationship as real relationship, and I talk about relational leadership a lot, where I talk about the authentic relationship is having that real connection and engagement with the people you work with or you come in contact with. And I think that's extremely important in the nonprofit space, at least from my experience, both on the government side and now as a board member in some nonprofits, in ensuring that you're engaging and listening to and connecting with the people you're serving, but also the people who are in your sphere. because that's important. You want to make sure that you're connecting and supporting the people who support you as a nonprofit. That's extremely important. But you also want to make sure that you're delivering those results so you can showcase to your stakeholders and others that you're doing exactly what you say you're doing. So authentic leadership, listening and relating, connecting with all of your people is extremely valuable. But in this space, it's vital.
Do you think some leaders of nonprofits kind of don't show their authentic self and kind of pull back information to try to either maybe not sound too big or maybe not ask for too much money, or what is it, do you think, that some of those character traits that some of the leaders do that you work with or that you have been involved with kind of show up differently when it comes to being like their authentic self or any other type of leadership style?
Well, I think there's a leadership style, and I think it can show up in nonprofit, it can show up in profit, it can show up in government. But there is a leadership style where leaders, I call it a phantom leader, where they literally hide behind a mask. They don't want to share themselves. They don't want to really put themselves out there. They don't want to engage with people because it makes them vulnerable. And they worry that, that puts too much of them in the space. And I think that's particularly can happen in nonprofit space because they're working so hard to support the organization and grow it so that it becomes successful. In those cases, sometimes they feel like it's too much them, and so they hide back in the background. And I think that's the exact opposite of what they should be doing. I think it's important to say, yes, this is my idea and this is what we're trying to do, or our idea, whatever if it's a we or me, but own it, but be vulnerable and tell the story, show why it's important to you and why it matters and why you're so passionate about it. Because when you're vulnerable and you can share that story, it helps people connect and understand, wow, this is really powerful. This is why this person wants to do this. And I was working recently with somebody in that kind of situation, and he was a little reluctant to kind of share some of his background. And I told him, I said, listen, people aren't going to invest with you if they don't feel like they know you, right? Whether it's money or time or, just engagement. They're not going to invest because they feel that barrier that I don't know who this person really is. So you have to show a little bit and show them why it's so important to you. And he did, and his investments are up.
Well, and I definitely think people can tell if you're being authentic or if you are hiding behind a mask. And usually the people that are hiding behind masks are just not confident in kind of maybe what they believe in. And they're just afraid to kind of show their vulnerability. But I 100% agree with you that that's what people connect with. And that's what you want, especially when running a nonprofit, is you want these people to connect with you so that they donate with money or their time volunteering or resources. So being able to really kind of show the authentic self, be vulnerable and put yourself out there is definitely a key aspect of being a great leader. And one of the great, I've interviewed hundreds of nonprofits, maybe even thousands. And the ones that I find are most successful on social media are the ones that put out the good, the bad, and the ugly stories. They're not just all good stories, because people and their followers, they want to see the struggle, right? And most likely that's usually when they get the most donations, is when they're sharing the struggle and unfortunate events. And that's usually when things kind of rally together and they really start to support you. I
think that this may get to your next question, but I think that's a showing of humanity, that you're human, just like everybody else, and you have obstacles and you have barriers, and showcasing that in any leadership capacity, but particularly in nonprofits, because they know that it's not a perfect world. People know that.
Yeah. And I think it's just a breath of fresh air when you can tell someone's just being authentic and being themselves, and They don't care about being vulnerable, and they're just going to be who they are. And those are usually the people that you can really relate with and get to become friends with.
I agree.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Well, let's see. I'd say that probably the biggest challenge was being a military spouse. Generally, military spouses move around. They change locations. They change countries sometimes. I did both. And, it is really, at the time, it was that I was going through it primarily in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. It was not acceptable. Like, job changes, people are looking at your resume going, what is this? I mean, I went from a GS-13 level attorney to a GS-6 executive assistant in Germany. I went from a 13 in DC to a GS-6 executive assistant in Germany. And, the first time somebody saw my resume, they're like, that's not how the career ladder works. And I said, really? You don't think so? Let's talk about why you think that. And, it took me some time to get there. And I came back and, got back on the ladder as an attorney. But that experience as an executive assistant in Germany was quite frankly life-changing. Some of the experiences I had, some of the things that I was able to see as well as learn. But I think when people move around a lot, at least in that time, it was considered a bad thing. That's changed quite a bit recently. And so, now it's a little bit, well, they might be changing for different opportunities or different, things they want to do, expanding their horizons or more narrowing what they think they want to do. And it's more acceptable. So I think, in those cases, that's been good. But that didn't stop it from being a challenge then. I mean, I even got to change law schools, which is a real no-no. Because they think, well, you changed because you were in trouble. No, the military just moved me across the country. So that was probably the biggest challenge is that, you're moving countries, you're moving locations, your world is different. And you're adjusting to that while you're trying to find employment and figure out your life and your life, your life partner is out running around the world doing things. And so, which you worry about that. And then you add some children in there and life gets really fun. But then I think the other piece of it that became really challenging is when I came back to DC and we were a little bit more stable after my husband transitioned out of the Air Force, I think just climbing the ladder as a woman and, you would think like by the 2000s, that's not a thing. But it still was. And it wasn't so much that people were holding me back just because I was a woman, but I was a woman with different perspectives and experiences. And so I didn't fit in their world, right? Because I didn't fit and I looked at things differently, they saw me as different, right? Which I don't think is a bad thing, but at the time, it was a challenge. And, even when I stepped into the role as the chief executive at the board as the first woman, I had been a careerist in the organization. And normally careerists, in most cases, don't become a political appointee. And so I had people that really didn't think that I was going to be successful. And they told me to my face, which I don't know that happens to men a lot. So I don't know.
So I watched your TEDx talk. Tell me a little bit more about the Catalyst Leadership Management. Is it a program? Is it coaching? I know you do speaking. Tell me a little bit more about the organization, what you guys do.
So the Catalyst Leadership Management is basically me. It's me. When I retired from the federal government, I wanted to kind of go out on my own and figure out what that looked like. And it primarily started as a consulting initiative. And then since then it's grown with the book. It's grown into a support for the book, but also the speaking piece. And so advising and speaking, whether it's conferences, whether it's training, whether it's working in small leadership groups with companies, there's a variety of different ways I consult. I don't initially I was thinking about coaching, but I think that coaching, there are so many great coaches out there that I know. I think I would just refer them to the coach. And then if you want to talk with me about general leadership principles and things about approaching how you approach things as a team and maybe some training, we can talk about that. But one-on-one coaching is a little different. Now, I do have a couple of executives that I do consult with, but that's more of an advisory role about how they view things and different things. And then there's also the board piece. So the website also supports that I'm available to sit on different boards. And I do. I sit on, like I said, a couple of nonprofits as well as a profit.
So I know in your TEDx talk, and you mentioned it earlier today about your father, dying of suicide. And I believe in your TEDx talk, you talk about your brother also. Mm-hmm. How has that journey, your personal story of the loss of suicide influenced your leadership and work that you do today?
Well, that really goes back to your very first question. So losing my father at the age of 4 to suicide, devastated me, of course. And, but it also resulted in people treating me and my mother differently. My brother was 16 years older than I was. And he was actually at boot camp, Army boot camp, when my father died. And so people really, shunned us in many ways. They excluded us because they wanted to not see us because we made them uncomfortable. Right. Mm. But what happened, there were a few people, as I noted earlier, and that those few people happened to be veterans. They happened to be veterans and veterans organizations. Not all had served with my father, but they knew my father, right? And they were the people that came along and supported us and encouraged us. And, my mom was a government teacher in town. She was the sole provider. And she was raising this little 4-year-old girl. And it was sometimes you need help raising, as a single parent, raising a child. And so, it was sometimes those communities. There were a few family members who were supportive, but that was hard. And then 13 years later, when I was 17 years old, I lost my brother to suicide 2 weeks before I left for college. And he left behind a young family. And, we really struggled with, how did this happen again? How did this happen? And, what we found out from the impact and living through it was that, we didn't understand that the impact of suicide can have in a family and on the people in the family. And so what we learned is we really didn't talk about my father's death after he died. And so when Terry died, it was, the kids were 13 and 9, I was 17. And, it became important for us to start talking about things and challenges that we had. And quite frankly, we still do that. I mean, I've raised 2 boys. They're now adult men, and they know the family history. My nephew and niece have children of their own. And, we talk about those challenges because they know what the family history is and how that's impacted us. I mean, there was nobody, I didn't have my father or brother to walk me down the aisle. My 17-year-old nephew walked me down the aisle when I got married. Yeah. So that changes how you perceive things, and you really learn very quickly the impact of people, both positively and negatively, because I saw both. And then, that went forward with me into my military life as a spouse.
And going back to kind of nonprofit work-life balance, how or why is the work-life balance important, and how can leaders kind of support it? And I can imagine that with your work and having kind of the military background or the military lifestyle of kind of traveling from base to base. My brother was in the military for 30 years. So I know, he was all over the world and only in a certain place for a certain amount of time. But how did that work-life balance kind of, how did you navigate that? And what advice would you have for people that could be in similar situations?
Well, I think, as you figure that out, and it is really, you have to figure it out for how you work. So, for example, I have ADHD. So, and I know I have ADHD, right? And so sometimes I can get really caught up in doing a lot of different things, and don't I don't realize that, all this other stuff is happening. Well, when you're a parent or you're a leader, if that happens to you, you're not present, you're not focused, right? And that's especially easy to happen in nonprofits because you're so engaged and really driving and passionate about making a difference. And I really need to go and have this meeting or go do this. And I really have to do that. But you have to stop and think, wait a minute, the purpose of this is to, impact over here. So what are you doing to make sure that you're kind of showcasing or being an example to exactly what you're talking about? So that was something that I learned, and I learned it as in leadership, actually. I learned it and then I forgot it, and then I had to learn again because you learn it at different levels, right? And so when I was young leader, mid-level leader, I learned that, okay, I need to take time and I need to have my reset time, and and the kids were young. And so I needed to ensure that I had that time with the family. It doesn't mean that work's not in your head, because your brain's still working somewhere. It's just, you're not focused on that. And then when you're at work, it doesn't mean that your family's not on your brain, because you're human. I mean, we can't hang our person on the door, right? When we walk into the office, we're human beings. Our life comes with us. It doesn't stop just because we, walked in the door of the office or turned on the laptop, right? But understanding kind of how you manage that. And sometimes life will come in and it takes the lead and you have to let it go. And, I learned that as a young leader, as a parent. And then as time went forward and the kids grew up and got older and kind of were doing their thing, and, you're checking in with them, making sure they're doing okay. Then I stepped into this chief executive role. And all of a sudden it started happening again. I was working all the time, because I had to show that I was prove myself, right? And that happens in nonprofits. They want to show that they're doing this, that they're out there, that they're engaged, they're making a difference, they're doing all this work. And then one day, one of my senior leaders said to me, it was actually interesting because I was supposed to be on leave and I had checked in and I'd called and then I'd sent an email. And he said, "Ma'am, we got it." He said, "But by doing this, you're conveying that you don't trust us." And I went, "Oh boy." But he was right. And it wasn't that I didn't trust them. It was I didn't trust myself to give up the reins. So I had to stop and say, okay. And so, I didn't stop thinking about work, but I became more present in where I was. And that's what was needed. And I think that's hard to do, especially in nonprofits, because you see things that are doing, you don't have a lot of people to support you. And so you see things all over the place that you need to do. And you really need to say, okay, what do I absolutely need to do? And what's the priority and what's the purpose I'm trying to do here?
And what advice would you have for nonprofit leaders that are navigating crises or maintaining organizational stability? So it kind of sounded a little bit there like, hey, you don't trust us, and letting go on the reins. But what other examples might you have about other organizations that you might have helped or worked with that kind of had similar situations like that?
Well, sometimes when you step into a role, and sometimes nonprofits, have different leaders that join them and different people that come on board and with different experiences, and people want to impact. And so sometimes when you step into a role, you find that it's a little messier than you thought. And, I call that, navigating rough waters, because, whether you're the captain of the ship or you're the navigator, you're dealing with treacherous waters there. And, you have to kind of read what's happening, and the chances are there's always storms on the horizon when that happens. And you have to figure out how you are going to navigate the ship. Well, the way you navigate the ship is by finding the people who can support you and can help you. And that is by making those relationships and building those trust relationships across. It's not always going to be pretty. I mean, when I stepped into the chief executive role, it was a mess. The results were through the floor. The morale was bad. The trust was bad. Stakeholders, many who were nonprofits, were not happy with us. And, we had a lot of expectations. And so the question is, okay, we're in full crisis mode. We've got new leadership. Now what? Well, that's when new leadership says, okay, we're going to go over here and do this. But when you're doing that, your actions and your words have to match. And that's extremely important. And I think when that's happening, ensuring that your team and the people around you all have the same message, your communication is good, you know what's going on, because you need to have, especially in nonprofits, when you have people watching sometimes more closely than they are in some other sectors, you have to make sure the message and your actions match.
And I'm certain stepping into the CEO role is a lot of weight on your shoulders. Who did you have to become to be able to step into that position and make an impact? And how long did it realistically take for you to really kind of right the ship and kind of get it going in the right direction?
Well, the one thing about the federal government is when you're moving into a political situation, you have a little bit of a process, right? So you're nominated and then you have a hearing and then, it kind of goes along. And my process was about 2 months, which was actually fairly quick. But they had been talking to me for about 6 months prior to that. So I had already started thinking. And because I was in the organization, I kind of had a little bit of advantage in that I knew where things were broken and I knew where it was messy. And so I started thinking about that and what's this going to look like and what do I need to do and what do I need to project? Because, I had also been there through 3 other chairmen coming in, through 3 other chief executives. And I knew what those transition looked like. And so for me, it was very comical. In fact, I tell this story, I walked out the door as a senior executive, as the number 2 senior executive in the organization, right? I walked back in an hour later as the chief executive, right? The top senior executive was still there, and he's a good friend, and he had been a mentor for years, and he now worked for me, right? I was working for him, he now worked for me. But people looked at me like I grown 2 heads. They looked at me completely different. And so I had to learn how to manage that, right? Because people who I had worked with for almost 20 years, all of a sudden were like, yeah, we'll see, I don't know, she's going to be the same as everybody else. And I'm like, no. And so I had to start day one by showing that I was going to be different. And again, actions, words, behaviors, it matters. All of that matters because people are watching, and not only your employees, but your stakeholders, people who are investing in you, whether it's the taxpayer, your customers, or your investors. And so, I was very much aware of that. And so I talked to the employees. I engaged with the employees. I was very visible with both the employees, but also with our customers and stakeholders. I was up on the Hill talking with them. I had the pleasure of having several hearings. I think of 5, somewhere between 5 and 7. I don't remember during the time I was in the role. But that's okay because I built relationships when I was there. But to answer your question about the time it took to turn around, that's the secret. So I stepped into the role in the end of November of 2017. And I had a couple of things that I wanted to work on, some technology issues and, making sure people felt supported and communicating. And we were all working on rowing in the same direction, getting all the crew going in the same direction because they're the ones that keep the boat afloat. And, I did a lot of walking around. And because that was not something that previous leadership had done. And I thought it was really important. And so on one of those, treks around the building, a young man came up to me and said, I'd like to share this idea with you that I have. Now, the young man happened to be an MIT. He's an MIT engineer and an attorney. And he knew and understood a lot more about technology than I ever will. And he had worked with his colleagues to come up with a way that helped our operational flow, our flow of work go faster for his colleagues. And so he's like, I think we can do this. And I said, okay. So the executive team met, and we were going to do, the traditional government tiger team, test it for 3 months, see how it goes. We got 1 month in, and everybody was talking about it because everybody talks about it, right? And they all wanted it. And it's like everybody wanted it now. So we had to roll out training and adjust and talk to people. And the young man took the lead, which was, a little bit out of his comfort zone. And he did train the trainer and things like that. That technology increased our output in year number 1 by 50%. What if I hadn't listened to him? What if he hadn't approached me in the hall? What if I hadn't been approachable? What if what if, right? But that time and that investment in people made a huge difference to the organization and to me as a leader, because it changed the trajectory of the organization, and people saw things differently. They got hope. Hope started happening, and I can do this, and this work, okay, there's better ways, and there's technology, and she's really doing what she said she was going to do. And so did everything fall into place in year 1? No. But that was a big piece of getting it into place in year 2. And it was early in year 2. And one of the things people ask me is like, similar to that question, how did you know? How did you know when things were right? And how I knew is when people started calling me chairman, my employees. Because remember, I had worked with most of them for my career. So they would still call me, ma'am, or they would call me, Sherry or Cheryl or, Mason, whatever. When they started calling me chairman, then I knew that we had turned the corner.
Well, it also sounds like you being your authentic self and being vulnerable, saying, hey, I don't know much about technology, but I'm willing to listen to ideas, really is what opened the door to allow them to share those ideas with you, and then, basically take one and run with it. So imagine if you were wearing a mask and you weren't being yourself, and you pretended like you were a know-it-all with technology, you probably wouldn't have had that opportunity come your way.
And, lawyers are classically risk adverse. And so, and my husband teases me about this all the time. He's like, he said, you are risk averse in your personal world. I said, yeah, I used to be until I, started my own business and all this stuff. I've learned to be more risky. But in the chairman role, like you said, putting on that role, I had to be a different person. I had to be I had to take risks. I had to champion. I had to, go up to the hill and fight for an increase in budget and show them how we were, delivering results. I mean, I literally put on the role of chairman to do that because I had to do that for my employees.
What key advice would you give a new and inspiring nonprofit leader looking to make a significant impact in their nonprofit?
I think one of a piece of advice, I don't know if it's the best piece of advice, but it's a piece of advice. I would again say, know your audience, know who you're going for and your why, what you want to do and why. And if you know if you know the how, and that's what you need the finances for, that helps too. But I think your what, why, and how are really important as a new nonprofit leader stepping into that and trying to carve out space, because that's what you're doing, is you're carving out space and competing with your other colleagues in the nonprofit world. And so show how you're unique, how you're different, what you're going to do.
And everybody has a unique perspective that they're going to shine on their organization that nobody else will. So take it and run with it, and don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid to just kind of take risks and challenges and be your authentic self, and it'll just go from there.
Yep. If it's, everybody's here for purpose and impact, and we all want to matter. We all want to make a difference. And so nonprofits, I think, understand that more so than anybody else.
Well, Cheryl Mason, this has been great. Tell everybody about your book. Where can they find it? What's the name of it? Where can they find you? I know they can go to YouTube and find your TEDx talks. But what's your website? How do you want people to connect with you and get in your world?
So sure, I have several ways to get to my world. So I am I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can follow me at Cheryl Mason, and you can find me there. You will probably see the TEDx talk at the top of the screen when you go onto LinkedIn. The book will be there too. The book is called Dare to Relate: Leading with a Fierce Heart. It is available on Amazon. And it has 5 stars. I'm very proud of that. It has good reviews. And so as for me, if you want to connect with me, you don't want to go on LinkedIn, you can check out my website, which is Catalyst, Catalyst, leadership, just like it sounds, leadership, mgmt.com. And that's where you can follow me and find out what I'm doing. And if you're not on LinkedIn, and I also have a Facebook link for the Catalyst, but I'm on LinkedIn more than I'm probably on Facebook. I got to work on that.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with everybody. And everybody can go and check out all the links in the bio to get into Cheryl's world, and they'll be reaching out to you soon, hopefully.
Good. Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I know a lot of nonprofits, and I think, I really respect the work that they all do. That's why I sit on a couple boards. And so thank you for what you do, because it does make a difference to them. So thank you.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's kind of why we show up every day, right? To share a little or spread a little bit impact in the world and see what we can do to kind of do our part to making everything a better place. Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. You're here. That means you're ready to take your nonprofit to the next level and make a greater impact. Come visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks to download free playbooks that your nonprofit can use today to start scaling to $1 million in donations. Plus, so much more. Catch the new behind-the-scenes insights on the next episode, and until then, here's to the impact you will make. I'm Tom Kelly. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and encourage others to listen.